Lamed Vovnik, Perek Sheni, the 6th line, Taner Rabbanon. Could somebody be Yotzei with his Maisa Sheni? So Maisa Sheni, we learned actually that if you have to bring it to Yerushalayim to eat it. But if it's too heavy, right, and you live very far away, so we know the halacha of redeeming it on money, and you bring the money to Yerushalayim and you spend it in Yerushalayim. So yesterday we learned about if you're at home, you redeemed your Maisa Sheni, so you're allowed to use your Maisa Sheni at home. Now it's not Maisa Sheni anymore for matzah, right? And then we learned that you didn't do it the right way. Are you allowed to be Yotzei Yidei Matzah? Now, today we're learning about actually you brought it right to Yerushalayim, and you want to bake it for matzah, and you want to use it. Not the money now. You brought your whatever you had. You had chitin wheat. You packaged it up to your suitcase. You came into Yerushalayim. You want to make your matzah now for the Seder in Yerushalayim. Sounds good, right? So Gemara says, you think you could do that? No, Talmud Loimar, it has to be lechem oini. In other words, matzah on the night of Pesach to Menachem the mitzvah has to be lechem oini. And mashe nechel, so we make a twist. Instead of the ayin, you put an olive in it. Mashe nechel ba'aninas, something that you could eat when you're an onei. When are you an onein? If somebody died in your family, you have to bury them. So that day, if your father died, and if I said right, so if that time before you do the kfura, before we do the kfura, you're considered an onein. So something that when you're an onein, you're allowed to eat, you could make that thing into matzah, and then you could yotze the mitzvah. Yotze zeh, but ma'aseh sheni she'ena nechel ba'aninas ela b'simcha. Ma'aseh sheni you cannot eat when you're an onein, only b'simcha. So therefore, since you can't eat it ba'onein, so it's not considered lechem oni, and therefore you cannot eat it als the mitzvah of matzah. That's different Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Rashi says that Ma'aseh Sheni Ein Nechel Ba'anina is like the 4th narrow line. Why? The Ksiv Lo Yachalti Be'oini Bimenu. So Ma'aseh Sheni you cannot eat when you're an onein. So Rabbi Kiva Aimer, no. If you're in Yerushalayim, you could use your Ma'aseh Sheni and bake it into matzah, because you have matzah's riba. You have a riboy to say even Ma'aseh Sheni in Yerushalayim you could eat the mitzvah matzah. In Kei Matzah Lechem Oni. If you could be mekayim the mitzvah with Ma'aseh Sheni, with your matzah, so why does it say lechem oni? So that is prat liisa shenelusha b'yayim v'shemen v'dvash. You cannot use matzah that was kneaded. The dough was kneaded with wine or oil or dvash, and that's what we learned yesterday, because it's matzah ashira, right? Now, my time with Rabbi Kiva plus miksiv. Why does he darshan it this way? Plus miksiv lechem oini with a vav to say that it means when you're an onein. No, aniksiv. It means poor man's bread, and therefore, if you do it with wine, that's matzah ashira. Rabbi Yossi Aglili mikarinan ani. When you read it, you don't read it as ani, only karinan. So therefore, it is. Even though it doesn't say with a vav, but we read it that way, and therefore it's considered that when you're an onein, something that you're allowed to eat as an onein, you could be mekayim the mitzvah of matzah. Rabbi Akiva, hi, the Karina ben Oini. The reason why we read it with like a vav, kiddush Shmuel, Shmuel lachem oini. When do you eat your matzah? It should be a time of lechem sha'oin olav dvarim harbe. When the matzah is there, that there are a lot of answers, a lot of questions, a lot of answers. And Rashi also says, so when you say the Agada, and also when you're going with the Hallel, that's when you should have the matzah and the mekayim the mitzvah of matzah. But the Gemara now, does Rabbi Kiva really hold that if you have a dough that was kneaded with wine or oil or honey, you cannot use that for matzah? Well, Tanya, we learned the Brisa. You should not knead your dough on Pesach with wine, shemen, and dvash. Rashi says, why? In other words, normally you have like 18 minutes to bake a matzah. But if you put this yayin on it, on the dough, it's going to be a quick process. And before you turn around, you won't be able to have matzah shmura. It won't be called matzah shmura anymore. So therefore, you might be charging the same prices, right? Yeah, but that's why you shouldn't. But if you're really careful, right? But since it's a quick process, that's why you shouldn't do it. But vimlush, let's say somebody does need it, so it's going to happen quickly. Rabbi Gimel, there's no time to go to the matzah bakery. To sarev miyad, you have to burn it right away. But the Chachamim say, you're allowed to eat it. Why? Because according to Chachamim, Rashi says, efshel l'shamra. You could make it into matzah shmura. Now, Rashi explains that when it says to sarev, and you burn it, Rashi says, v'moyed kamar. It's talking about chalamoyed. But v'loy yantiv. If somebody needs on yantiv with wine, you cannot burn it on that. Why? The avara shalei l'tzarech. On yantiv, you can't make a fire shalei l'tzarech, only for achilas to eat, right? So this, when it says v'tzarev, it's referring to chalamayit. Okay, but we're continuing on to our kasha. We're trying to prove that Rabbi Akiva does allow it. Because V'amar Rabbi Akiva says, Shafti hoysha hoysa eitzlo Rabbi Lezer Rabbi Yeshua. I was dwelling not on Shabbos, but I was there for Yontif. I was Oila Regel. I went to my Chaverim Rabbi Lezer Rabbi Yeshua. And what did I do? Velashti lahem Isa. And I kneaded their dough behind the Shem Dvash. V'le'amali davar. They didn't say anything. That means they agreed with me. But what do we see from here? That Rabbi Akiva holds you are allowed to, right? So we have a steer in Rabbi Akiva before he says you're not. We just end off the brisa. It says v'afal pishein lush, and the brisa says, but our kashi, everybody sees the kasha of Rabbi Akiva. Then the brisa ends up and says, even though you're not allowed to be shein lushin with yayin and shemen and dvaj, still you could be mikatfinba. You could smear it after you set up the matzah. You could put a little wine at the end. Like today, when somebody bakes a challah, you make an egg challah. If anybody sees their wives do it, or maybe a husband does it, you put a little egg and you smear it nicely on it. Is that called kneading, though? That's not. It's after it's set up already, right? But he just said that he kneaded the. No, that was different. You kneaded it the right way with just water. Right?
No, different story. Rabbi Akiva was a different story.
Right? This is a different thing. Now, Alpha Bishain Lushin, even though you're not allowed to put wine on it in the beginning of the process, but once you did it with water only, at the end you could put a little wine on it. Asyan, that goes Latanakama because it says ain't Lushin, because according to Rabbi Akiva, you could be Lushin. So this statement is Latanakama. No, if I allow you to knead it with wine, then you could put the wine at the end. But if we don't allow the wine because it's going to be a quick process of chametz, then ain't mikatvan. But the shavim, there's no machlokish ain't lashon as a isa b'poshrim. When it comes to kneading dough with lukewarm water, even everybody holds that you can't do it. Why? Rashi says, because that is mamish mamarin lahachmitz. It's ein yachal l'shamra, it'll become chametz. But we have a stira in Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says here that you could knead the dough with wine, and before we learned that he can't. So Gemara says like kasha, ha b'yantiv rishon, ha b'yantiv sheni. It depends. If it's yantiv rishon, the first night where you're sitting at your seder, so the matzah is achiyuv, so therefore you need lechem oini, right? And therefore wine, if you put it with wine, the dough, then it's not lechem oni. Yantiv sheni, if you already did your seder already, and it's during chalamayid, then it's okay to do it with wine. Kedamar lo Rabbi Shua lebnei, just like Rabbi Shua told his son, Yaim Kama, the first night that we're sitting at the seder, don't need my matzah with milk. But later on you could. So you see that only the night of Seder you shouldn't do it with milk because it's matzah asherah. But during Chalamoyed it's okay. Now the Gemara says I have another problem. That means the rest of Yontiv you're allowed to knead it with milk. You cannot make milchike bread, milchike matzah.
No, you're not doing it.
Vimlash, if you do it, kolapas asura. Why? Because if you have milchike matzah, you're going to eat it with basar, right? So it is asur. So how did Rabbi Yeshua tell his kids that during Yontif you do it with milk? It's okay on Chalamayid. We see a whole year you can't do it with milk. Gemara says no, he didn't tell him milk. It was yoyim kama leitlushli betufsha. Don't do it with honey. That was the story, but not. But the ibay say melayla mechalba. He did tell his son that you could knead my matzah with milk. There's a problem of hergel aver. You might come to eat meat with it. No, Ravina, he says ki ayin Torah shari. Like the eye, if you bake matzah, in other words, or bread the size of an ox, which is very small.
No. Eye of an ox.
The eye of an ox. What did I say?
Ox.
Okay, ki ayin Torah. So shari. That's mutter. Why? Because it's such a small piece, you can eat it up quickly. You won't be laying around when your fleishik meal comes along to eat it. Right? So achinami, that's I was thinking when it says ki ein Torah, I thought when I was learning it first.
Oh.
But it's ki ayin Torah.
Yeah.
Right? But you're right. If it's ki ein Torah, if you made it like ox, so it's different. So you remember, right? Achinami ki ein Torah. And that's what we learned. If you have your bag where the matzah is on it, says OUD on it, then you're okay because that is you'll remember that you want to eat it with fleishiks. It's OUD, so it's okay. Vishavin shein lashin as a isa, is there COR there? D, no, it's COR dairy. It says,
dairy,
right?
dairy.
But it doesn't say D. It's OUD. So the difference between COR, right, and OU. Okay. Everybody holds you shouldn't knead your dough with lukewarm water. Why? Because that causes a quick process to become chametz. So for the Gemara, is why by the menachis that they have to come. Also in matzah, and there we allow it to be kneaded with poshrim. We're not worried that it's coming in the chametz. So why the matzah on Pesach night we are worried? Where do we see menachis? You're allowed to be lushin b'poshrin. Detnan kol hamenachas nulushin b'poshrin. But you should be mishamish lo yichmitzu. So you see that menachis, you're not worried that it should become chametz. So why on Pesach are we worried? So our answer is, this reason, if the kahanim that are doing the menachis, if we allow them, because they're zaris, they're not fast. They're zaris. They're careful, right? So Yaim B'Shein is the reason. You can let every Jew in his household allow it. It's going to come into chametz, so therefore we don't allow it. For the Gemara, if we allow the kahanim to do lisha because they're zaris, yihachi miltas nami losses. Why don't we let them soak the grain in water too? Alama Amar Abzera Amar Rabba Bar Yirmi Amar Shmuel Chitin Shel Menachas Ein Loishin Losis Hinosa. You don't let them soak it. Rashi says, why do you do this, Tisa? L'shurim b'mayimad. Before you even start the process, you take the wheat and you soak it in water, so you can be able to get softened up, and you start grinding it up, lahasir mursanan, to take away all the bad particles. Soleltas nikia should be a pure, a clean soles. So we say that we don't let the kahanim do it because it might come into chametz. But if there's zaris, what's the problem? Why don't we let them do it? And for the Gemara, Lisha is reason Isa. You're right. Kneading is only done by the kahanim, so that's why we allow it. But Lesisa, Lesab is reason. Even a Zar Yisrael could do that process for the menachas before he could do the Lesisa. He could soak it and clean it up. So since Yisrael does it, therefore we don't allow it because he might not be Zaris. For the Gemara of Elisha Yisab is reason. You're saying the kneading process has to be done by Kahanim. It can't be done by Yisrael, because if it can be done by Yisrael, then we should worry that it might come into chametz. We see that even a Zar could do the Elisha, the kneading. It says a pasuk v'yatzak aleh shemen by all the menachis v'avi al hakoyen. It's mashma mikimitza ve'elach mitzvah kuna. Limeid al yitzika, pouring the oil, ubelila, mixing it, sheksher b'chol adam. Right? So even Lisha is allowed by a Zar. So why are we worried that he's not a Zariz? Why do we allow him to do it by the Menachis? And for the Gemara, Lisha, you're right. There's a reason, Leka. Even though the Kohen doesn't have to do it, but Makim's reason, Misa. It has to be done in the Azara. So since the Yisrael is in the Azara, he'll be careful, or people will remind him. Damamar, Belilak Sher Bazar, he could mix everything, even a Yisrael, but Chutz L'chom is Azar Psula. So therefore we allow Lisha, even though it's done by Yisrael, because it's Makim's reason. But Lafuki, Lasisa, when you are out, let's say in your fields, and you're soaking, you come home, and you're soaking your chitin to make it nice, the Einab is reason, it's not done by Kahanim, and V'lai Makim's reason. And it's also not done in the Azara. So therefore, we are worried that it might become Chametz. For the Gemara now, now Now Rashi says that once the Yisraels in the Azara, Kivan de Ba'azari Isa Chazilu Kahanim, the Kahanim will look at them, and they will remind them and teach them not to make it into Chametz. Okay. In other words, Shmuel just finished saying, all menachos you can't do lisisa. You can't soak it in the beginning to clean it up. But why by the minchas ha'omer we allow it, even though it might become chametz? And where do we see that minchas ha'omer you're allowed to do it? The Tanya, minchas ha'omer, los also. You could soak it before, and vitzovrin also, and you pile it up. So you see, you're allowed to do it by Minchas Omer. So why don't we allow it by the other Menachos too? And for the Gemara, Tzibor Sha'ani. What does that mean? The first wide line of Rashi, Tzibor Sha'ani. Minchas Omer is a carbon Tziboru. The Chol HaSakin Shelo, all the preparations you do with it, Nas Napi Bezdin. When you're harvesting the lisisa hakal bezdin, therefore it's the reason, and they'll be careful. We allow it. Ikadamri, some people say it means not sibor shani, it's savur shani, where it's piled up. The hoyel v'tzayvin also, when you're piling up the chitin, meimel, even though you soaked it and it's wet, it won't become chametz. Why? Because meimel is zavin. And since you piled it up, it's getting squished down, all the water will drip out. Right? The eimach mitzin. So there's two ways of learning it. Is it tzibor shani or tzavar shani? Tan Rabbana. Yachol yeh adam yidei chavasa b'bikurim. So now, how about a kohen? A kohen gets his bikurim. Bikurim is only eaten in Yerushalayim. Could he make his matzah for the say of the night with his bikurim? So Gemara says, you think you could? No. Tambaloymar b'chol mosh v'seichem teichlu matzah. Matzah nechelas b'chol mosh v'seichem. You can make matzah out of dough that is eaten everywhere. Yasa bikurim. Since shein and b'chol mosh v'seichem ella b'Yerushalayim, only in Yerushalayim bikurim can be eaten. So therefore, you cannot be yotzei your mitzvah's matzah with bikurim. Divrei Rabbi Yosef. Glili.
Said the Meister Sheni, they should have said the same thing.
What's that?
The Meister Sheni could have answered the same thing.
That what?
We only can eat it.
Yeah, so we'll see it on number base. Very good. See? You're looking on the right.
No, I'm not there yet.
Rabbi Kiva, anyway, we'll see that on Amid Beis. Matzah and mar. The reason why you can't eat bikurim was there's a hekesh between matzah and mar. Mar, it says matzah and marim yachlu, right? Al matzah and marim yachlu. So mar ain't a bikurim. Mar is not brought from bikurim because Rashi says the last wide line that you bring bikurim only from the zayin minin. So since Mara doesn't come from Bikurim, Av Matzah she'ena Bikurim. So Imam Mara she'ena Mina Bikurim, Mara nothing could come out Bikurim. Av Matzah maybe she'ena Bikurim. So maybe I'll exclude Oti Chitim Isaorin she'esh b'mina Bikurim. So maybe you can't make matzah out of chitin and saorin. That's not what else, right? So Talmud Laimar, that's why it says matzah is riba. So for the Gemara, matzah is riba. If you have a riboy to say even chitin sayer and that's sheyesh min bikurim, safil bikurim nami. So why can't we be marba bikurim from matzahs? So the Gemara says hadebei Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva Rashi says has charata from mehache kesha the matzah mar. So that's not his limud. His limud is v'yal bikurim. The reason why you can't use bikurim for matzah because it has to be b'chol mosh v'seichem, and bikurim is only used in Yerushalayim. Where do we see the Rabbi Kiva had charata from the hekesh of matzah? Mar the Tanya. We learned a brisa. Yochel yatsa adam yidei chavasa b'bikurim. Maybe a kohen could make his matzah out of bikurim. Tamaloyme b'chol mashvesechem teichlu matzahs. Only matzah nechels b'chol moishvais yatsa bikurim. Shein in the Chaim Mechol Moishvas Eli B'Yerushalayim. Now the question is, Yachol Shani Moitzi Af Ma'aseh Sheni. So maybe from this pasuk also Ma'aseh Sheni you shouldn't be able to be yotzei your mitzvahs matzah. So Talmud Leimer matzah is riba. In other words, that you could.
How many things can you use Ma'aseh for?
So the Gemara says, Amara is l'Rabbi's Ma'aseh Sheni. Why are you marba that you're allowed to use Ma'aseh Sheni for matzah in Yerushalayim u'lo'iti bikurim? And why are you excluding your mamayet bikurim in Yerushalayim? So marba ani Ma'aseh Sheni sheyesh leheter b'chol moshvos. There is a heter with Ma'aseh Sheni that you could use it. Rashi says, Kid Rabbi Lezer, like Rabbi Lezer says, Well, so therefore, since according to Rabbi Lezer, we'll read Rashi right away, because the Gemara says, well, let's see, Rashi could Rabbi Lezer, the second narrow line, the nitma, let's say the Ma'aseh Sheni became Tameh, so you're allowed to be Poden also. Even though normally when you bring something to Yerushalayim, you can't do the P'tiyah. The redemption is only back home. When it's too heavy to carry, right? You're allowed to redeem it outside and go to Yerushalayim. But once you get into Yerushalayim, you got to use it. You can't stop redeeming it in Yerushalayim. But there is an allowance. When are you allowed to do it? If you came to Yerushalayim and your Ma'aseh Sheni became Tameh. So what do? You're paid in Aryai. Aryai then mikol makom hilkach kilay nitmonami. Even when it did not become Tameh, v'lay nivda, still nafik be we allow it. Since it could be redeemed when it becomes Tameh, so therefore even when it doesn't become Tameh, we have that ribui. Back to the Gemara. So therefore, Marbani Ma'aseh Sheni sheyesh leheta b'chol mosh v'krab lezer u'moitzi ani bikurim chos she'ein leheta b'chol mosh. There's never a heta to eat it outside Yerushalayim. Da'amar Rab Lezer menayin Ma'aseh Sheni shenitma she'payit noisa afila b'Yerushalayim, even Yerushalayim. So you're allowed to, if at home it comes Tameh, you redeem it, so and even when you come into Yerushalayim,
will you sell it in Yerushalayim?
What's that?
Who you selling?
Well, you won't eat it, but they could use it for fight, whatever it is. You could use it for, you get a no out of it. Talmud Loimar, it says Kiloi Suchal Se'eso. By Yosef and his brothers, it says Kiloi Suchal Se'eso. But they ain't Se'es. We say Se'es means Ela Achila. Shenemar, sorry, here it says Yosef. Shenemar Vayasim Masis Meis Panav. So we see Kiloi Suchal Se'esoi. By Ma'aseh Sheni means when you cannot eat it. When can't you eat it? When it became Tameh. And it says that you're allowed to redeem it. So that's why we are Marbe Ma'aseh Sheni from Matzah's Ribo, and we exclude Bikurim Chol Mosh Pesechem.
You could say it anyways.
Man Shamadle. Now
you can't redeem Bikurim and Ma'aseh Sheni. You can at anything, whether it's Tameh or not. And you're going to eat that food that you redeem the money for, you can eat outside Yerushalayim.
So you could have said it. You could have said it that way. Okay, so, but anyway, Man Shamadle, we're trying to prove that Rabbi Akiva was Hadar Bey. He retracted from what he said. So here's the proof. Man Shamadle, Dama Ma'aseh Sheni Nafik Bey. That's Rabbi Akiva. And the price is before. And here it says it says Beferish from what? Not from the hekesh of Matzah Mar, but from Chol Mosh V'Seichem. So Shmami Na Hadar Bey. Fred the Gemara now, Rabbi Yisrael Glili. Why does Rabbi Yisrael Glili learn Bikurim from Chol Mosh V'Seichem? Tepik Le Menachem Oni Mishnechel Ba'oni. You can only use matzah. That's something that's eaten when you're on onein. Yatzazeh Bikurim Shein Nechel El B'Simcha. Bikurim you cannot eat when you're in onein. So since you cannot eat it ba'onein, only b'simcha, so that's why you cannot use matzah. So why did Rabbi Yosef Glili have to use a new limud from B'chol Moishvai Seichem? Right? And the reason why we bring this down according to Rabbi Yosef Glili, because in the beginning of the DAF today, we learned Rabbi Yosef Glili by Ma'aseh Sheni learns it from Lechem Oni. So just like by Ma'aseh Sheni he learns it out from Lechem Oni, why do you have to come up with a new limud of B'chol Mosh V'Seichem? Use the same limud of Lechem Oni, right? So Gemara answers because he holds, because Rabbi Yosef Glili saw like Rabbi Shimon, but the Tanya Bikur Masurim La'onein, but Rabbi Shimon is Matir. My time with the Rabbanon. Why do Rabbanon hold that a bikurim you cannot eat when you're onein? Because it says the ksiv leisuchal echol b'shurecha. You cannot eat bikurim in your city. V'amamar, and trumas yatcha. It says there the word trumas yatcha, and that is bikurim. So we see that what the ishkas bikurim lemaisa. So bikurim is lemaisa. Ma'amaisa also la'onein, like we said from Rashi, because it says lo yachalti b'oini mimenu. Right? So Afikurim is Aser La'onein. But Reb Shimon holds Teruma Karinain. When it says Trumas Yatcha, that's Bikurim, and the Torah calls it Truma. Must be Truma Karina Rachmana, it means Kitruma. It has the same din as Truma. Ma Truma Muteres La'onein. A Onein is allowed to eat Truma. Rashi says, how do you know that from? Because it says, B'chol zar yisei rasai. It says in the pasuk, B'chol zar. Zar yisei martilach. I just excluded and not allowed a zar to eat truma, but v'lei aninus. So just like a truma is mutal oinen, af bikurim mutal oinen. Reb Shimon, right? So need hekesh less lay, but simcha mia michtaksive. Okay, you don't have the hekesh, but it still says simcha. Tiksivis amachta b'chol hatov. So how could you eat it when you're in onein, right?
Right.
It says b'simcha. Or says no. That pasuk is referring to not how to eat it b'simcha, but ahu l'zman simcha. It's for zman simcha. Hu de'asa. Rashi says zman simcha is b'zman ketzira v'likita. Shel adam locate tefuasai v'liba samach hitzricha akosov karya da'ar arami ovid avi. So in other words, you're so happy. You see, machai, you have a great crop, so you're happy and you're really praising Hashem, but at the same time you're also saying arami Oved Avi. So how do you know when is this man simcha? The Tnan, we learned the Mishnah. Me'atzeres v'adachag, from Shvuos till Sukkos, Mevi v'korei. When you bring your bikurim, you bring it, maybe, and also the kairei, you say the parsha of bikurim. Now Rashi explains that mi'atzeres, you could only bring bikurim from Shvuos. Why not before? Why not from Pesach? So Rashi says that Nam b'Menachem is ein mavim bikurim kaidel matzeres. Why? Sheshtei halechem shel atzeres matirin havas bikurim. The bikurim ikru the ksiv. We see that Shvuos is called the yontiv of bikurim. The ksiv of yoyim habikurim. So since Shavuos is called Bikurim, the Yantiv of Bikurim, that's why you bring Bikurim only at the start of Shavuos, not back at Pesach. But if you bring it from Atzeres till Chag, till Sukkos, and Rashi says Sukkos Shebetoich Zman Hazeh is also Zman Lekita. In other words, you're picking it. V'samach b'maisav. You're looking back. Shavuos, you're coming there and saying, look what's happening in my field. At Sukkos, you're looking back of what you did during the summer years, the summer months, and you're happy, right? So that's why you made the kairei. But then it says Ma'achag v'ad Chanukah, from Sukkos till Chanukah, you are maybe, even till Chanukah, ve'ena korei. Rashi says, why are you not korei? Because from Sukkos to Chanukah is ein zman simcha, but ve'ena korei. But once Chanukah comes in, we say Eino Zman Hava. That's not at all, because it says Hashitavi me'artzecha kol zman shemitzuyin al pnei artzecha shlei kol Chaim and Asada. It's still laying out in the field. But once Chanukah comes out, it's the cold winter days. It's all gone in the field. There's nothing out in the field, so there's no mitzvah bikurim. So after Chanukah, there's an Indian still of bringing bikurim. And that's why everybody knows with Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, you get a kapara, and then even Hoshana Rabbah comes along, and it's mamish, it's like you have to do tshuva. So they say even till Chanukah, you could do tshuva, even though you didn't do it by Yom Kippur. And by Hoshana Rabbah, you have up to Chanukah to do it. So a rabbi once was saying this drasha to his congregants. So one of them say, you know something? I never understood. When I'm saying Rosh Hashanah, Yikosevun, we're always screaming, Mi bechanika u mi baskila. I never know why we bring in Chanukah into Rosh Hashanah. So he says, now I understand why, because Chanukah you get it. But Mi bechanika means who's going to get killed by choking. But he thought it was always Chanukah, right? So now he understood it. Tana Rabbana. Lechem Aini. Even a joke you have to explain, right? You need an art school on a joke.
I laughed before.
Okay, Tana Rabbana, Lechem Aini, Prat L'chol Lashisha. You can use your matzah through with only Lechem Aini, but you cannot use boiling cholot is hot water. If you make your matzah with hot water, so it comes out really nice, we don't allow that. Ula shisha, and you cannot make your matzah like Rashi says, kuluska Gedalia, like a big cookie. You make a nice big matzah. You look like a rebbe. You sit down with the matzah. Machaya. No, it has to be lechem oni. It has to look like pork. So if you're establishing that it has to be poor man's bread, so maybe my matzah should look tzebrachen. It should be bepas hadra. Rashi says pas hadra means shenitel kol hadara. All the beauty was taken away. So you should have mamish ugly matzah and eat. Right? No, matzah's riba. In other words, don't make it too fancy, but don't make it too ugly. Something in the middle. But and the Brisa says va'afilu kimatzah, not shel shleima, not shleimus, but kishleima. You can even make a matzah like Shlomo HaMelech. Rashi says the second line, Shlomo HaMelech shahaya muhunak, Kolom esol is nekiyah. Shlomo HaMelech's matzah was muhunak, was like onik Shabbos, was beautiful. He made it. So in other words, you have to know the limit. You can't overdo yourself. Don't make it too fancy, but you should make it nice. So we're excluding plat l'cholod, hot water with ashisha. Umay mashma the hay ashisha. This shape ashisha is lishna de chashivusa, something important, beautiful. The ksiv, it says in pasuk vayicholik l'chala am l'chala amoin Yisrael l'mi ishvat isha l'Ish chales lechem achas v'ashvar achad, and it says v'ashisha achas. And Rav Chanan explained v'am Rav Chanan barabba ashvar is echad mishisha bepar. It's like a measurement, how much flour is that. And ashisha is achad mishisha be'efa. But we see that ashisha is lashon chashivus. So you should not make your matzah in this shape of ashisha. But the pligi to Shmuel, you can't bring a proof that the ashisha is so beautiful by matzah. Because Shmuel says, Amar Shmuel, ashisha really refers not to flour, it's referring to garba de chamra, a bottle of measurement of wine. Diksiv, v'hava ashisha anavim. So this garba de chamra is the eifo shel yain, is the measurement of wine. Shkoch.